Here we go. Welcome back to another Insider Masterclass with yours truly, Sam Portland. And today we are going to look at adaptation and intensity and how these things interconnect. Because something that I have been thinking about and something that is really important to me is helping coaches and helping people like you come away from spending too much time obsessing over non-specific things to create specific outcomes. Like, you're here because you want to develop speed. You're here because you want to improve your athlete's speed. You're here because you want to make a difference. And the biggest challenge that you face and the biggest challenge that the S&C industry faces is that it's mastered the ability to over exaggerate non-essential training and over analyze non-specific training, um, to try and engineer specific outcomes. And if you can start to let go of that, you're going to progress and your athletes are going to progress, because that's why you're here. You're here to help your athletes improve. So, um, a bit of an ego check at the beginning of today, but there's a few things that are not, they're just like a waste of time, personally, that I think, right? So when we look at the categorization of general training, um, so much, and if you've got the book and that running in fast in a straight line is the most general thing that we can do for team sports, general speed. So then everything that we do underneath it, such as weight room and all those sorts of things, those things, if they do not inform or and have an upstream effect to that athlete, then they're a waste of time. And so a large mistake that's been made is that we think that there is an upstream effect from strength, power, speed, when actually there's a more potent effect for speed, power, strength on the way down, because speed equals power and strength. If you think about and really look at your program and really start asking questions of your training, ask the question, does this do what it's meant to do? Is this going to achieve the result that I want it to? And arguably, like, we have to eat humble pie, and a lot of the time it isn't. So you can get rid of stuff like hip block drills, you can get rid of stuff like stretchy spinal engine theory nonsense. Though I think spinal engine is a big thing, um, but you don't influence that in the gym. You influence it and understand it through dynamic explosive movement, and that's a skill, and that's just something that we have to get better at. And then rather than going down needless rabbit holes of training, that doesn't really matter. So what we're going to look at today is the rate of adaptation and understanding this from a conceptual basis, but also a practical basis. So when we get a new stimulus, so there's something called the law of accommodation that dictates that within 21 days if an organism is placed under a consistent stress, it will adapt to that stress. So 21 days, which is typically why you probably have been taught 3 weeks on, 1 week off for your initial programming and deloading. So that is really interesting straight on from the bat, that if you didn't know that, then you do now, and that should inform your training programs. However, when we start to think about this, we need to rig this in our favor. So first and foremost, that initial adaptation from stimulus is sometimes not always positive. It can be negative. For example, if you've not done back squat for a while, and you start back squatting, you're going to get really sore. I don't know about anyone else, but I always get super sore from squatting, um, as opposed to like deadlifts and stuff like that. They just really crank me up, and they do a lot of other athletes. So you have to learn to accommodate to that stressor. But again, that's a really general thing for developing general strength. And do we really, really need to measure the effectiveness of a squat to an acceleration? Because it's again trying to get general specific adaptation from general training means it doesn't work like that. And what we need to do is start to develop specific strength to create specific adaptations. And that's the law of specificity and the principle of specificity, which is largely forgotten. So when we look at our rates of adaptation, we need to we need to engineer positive net effects. And it depends on the time of the year as well. And depending on the time of the year, I've said the word that I don't like to use, but when you're in the off season, for example, you can afford to accumulate a bit of soreness. And that's great because you're trying to increase the adaptive reserve by 1 to 2%. Okay. If you get 2% increase on your strength, then take it and use it because that's what it's there for. It's there to help you survive specific means. So we can then start to consider, if you look at the initial adaptation, early adaptation, late adaptation, we want to ride that wave as best as possible. But we never want to get to negative adaptation because of the law of accommodation. If we start creating negative adaptation with the stressor, which a lot of team sport athletes suffer from, this perpetual cycle of creating negative adaptation, using the principle of specificity in the wrong way. So if we, the golden one is that athletes, coaches, they try to keep improving their compound exercise and lifts all year round, which is actually going to negatively detract from the qualities that are trying to improve for team sports. So it's creating a negative net adaptation, and then that exercise will become redundant. So we want to take a really targeted example of this and practically applied. We want to make sure that we do manipulate this rate of adaptation. We don't, for a lot of athletes, if you look at the diagram that's got the big red X on it, we typically find we do weight room and then run fast and tear hamstrings and run slow, essentially. So what we want to be able to do is create the intensity curves and think about those red dots as exercises or adjustments of specificity as we're going up the curve to nurture the adaptation. So we don't get soreness, which is really important for long periods of time. And we also are able to continue to create continuity within the training process, which is really important. Continuity is so important, which allows the adjustments. We go back to the law of accommodation every 21 days, the adaptation, where we want to be changing things roughly every 21 days in season at least, in order to maximize the dose load response. Okay. So a lot of my athletes in season, I actually work with them on 14-day cycles, and we look at three to four workouts over 14 days and seeing what's happening to make sure that we're getting the adjustments that we want. But that's for later down the line. But here we're going to look at, for example, a banded single leg load and smash as a specific strength exercise for acceleration. So our initial adaptation from that, we're going to get skill. So we're going to get motor unit recruitment and motor learning in those positions. These exercises are highly underrated for specific strength adaptation because people think they're just technique. They're not. You can load them up really, really aggressively and do them in a very dynamic fashion. So our goal initially would be to maximize that initial adaptation and understand it with our short acceleration. So our learn, load, execute model, which you'll be fully versed in now, we can see how we can understand the initial adaptation by using these exercises through loading and learning. And then we can intensify that. So we could start with maybe a purple band and then end up with a green, then a blue, and maybe those big beefy orange ones. And as long as the execution of the movement is still happening to an acceptable speed, remember, we don't want it too slow, because if it's too slow, it's going to start to detrain acceleration. We can then manage that adaptation. So we will improve, say, a purple band wave. We'll get initial adaptation through coordination, speed of movement, rate of force development, and we can nurture that. But then we're going to need to develop a little bit more specific strength to then improve acceleration ability. So we can isolate this as our base movement, and then we can tag onto it all of our resisted work and our accelerations and our confirmation work. So you should be able to see how this can start working. And I challenge you to case study and utilize them. Just focus on one specific aspect of acceleration using a couple of specific exercises and become invested in that and see for yourself the power, because it is absolutely mind-blowing. And better yet, the irony of it is that your base gym strength will go up anyway. It will, because speed equals strength and power. All right, so we're going to start looking at breaking down some of this in a lot closer detail over the coming weeks to really get you juicing in the inside of way. All right, so go apply, think, digest, and I'll see you for your next